Hello and welcome to the ACE's Emerging Professionals webcast, a series of short conversations with a wide range of inspirational speakers on the most challenging topics in our industry. My name is Emily Scoones and I'm a member of the Emerging Professionals in the London South East region. And today we are discussing the topic of entrepreneurship and the challenges of starting your own business as an emerging professional. I'm very lucky today to be joined by Brittany Harris, who is the co-founder and CEO at QFlow, an awesome tech startup that is helping to make construction projects more sustainable. So Brittany, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So just to sort of kick off with, are you able to kind of give a little introduction into your journey and into what QFlow is doing?
Sure. So a bit about, I'll sort of explain my background, I guess. So I'm a civil engineer. I studied at the University of Bristol, started sort of working with Mott MacDonald Engineering, and then did a short stint on site in Hong Kong with Laing O'Rourke, which was absolutely amazing, an incredible site, working on the Admiralty Station sort of connection to the South Island line. So this 40-metre deep excavation into pink granite, it was really incredible. But then came back to the UK and ended up working for Bureau Happold Engineering in their water team. While I was working with them, I ended up volunteering for this charity called World Merit, which had this mission of bringing together youth leaders from around the world to try and tackle the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was there that I met my co-founder, Jade. So we actually co-founded an NGO to start with that was looking at the WASH sector, so water, sanitation and hygiene. But after a couple of years of really working on that, but also having full-time jobs, we kind of came around to this realization that although NGOs have a really important role to play, to have the scale of impact and the fundamental change that we wanted to see in the world, we were going to have to take a slightly different approach. And, working in construction and engineering every day, we were seeing the level of waste and inefficiency and the sort of lack of sustainability that was going on and getting a bit more frustrated. And I spent a lot of time trying to champion stuff up internally and, introduce new things, but was often finding pushback around, it's not what the client wants, and sustainability was still quite new, I felt. So in 2018, Jade and I decided to pitch an idea to the Royal Academy of Engineering, and this was part of their Launchpad competition. And really where we started was this very broad remit of let's make construction more sustainable. And one of the things that we'd identified was actually tracking and managing the impact of construction was really hard. So we pitched this idea of tracking and managing the impact of construction using things like IoT devices to try and capture that data and learn things from it that we could act on. So the Royal Academy liked this. They gave us a bit of grant funding and accepted us onto this sort of entrepreneurship program, which they have called the Enterprise Hub. But it was also there that we got, scouted by an organisation called Entrepreneur First. And what they do is they take really, really nascent, sometimes even pre-idea sort of companies and founders and smash them together and incubate them for 3 months. And then if they like what you're doing, they give you some money to continue to grow the company. And so this was this sort of first step into entrepreneurship. Jade and I had no idea what we were doing. We were so out of our depth, and coming from this risk-averse industry of civil engineering and construction and being surrounded by these people who just take that Silicon Valley idea of move fast and break stuff and just, throw stuff out there. It was just such a contradiction in our heads. So we had a lot of learning to do. But during that time, we spent a lot of time talking to the industry and really starting to understand why is it so hard to track and manage these things, and why do we find it really hard to see the value in being more sustainable during construction, like the financial value. And that's where we met our first client, Canary Wharf Contractors. We set out to solve a very specific problem for them around tracking FSC certified timber on and off site. And we developed a really simple piece of technology that enabled them to do that, which basically takes a photograph of the goods received note so they can see what's come onto the project, and then uses a cool bit of machine learning to basically digitize and audit it so they know as soon as possible that whether that material is right for the project or not. And so by solving that problem, we we got our first contract with them, and then Entrepreneur First said, you're clearly onto something, so let's give this a bit of cash and see where you guys go. And it kind of just grew from there. It was very slightly haphazard and slightly accidental, but ultimately now we've raised 2.4 million in funding. We've grown the team to 23 people. So we've got software engineers and data scientists working with us to continue to develop and build this product to ultimately help the industry be more sustainable.
I think that's how all great inventions are created a little bit, is by, accidents happening and you falling upon things that you weren't quite sure were going to happen. I mean, that's a great story. And I mean, you've touched on it a little bit already with what you were saying, but what made you decide to kind of take that leap of faith in starting your own business rather than maybe trying to develop the same thing in an existing or bigger company? And was it not scary to start your own business?
That's a good question. So I think the thing that really made us decide to go down this route is that we'd tried the other way. Over the sort of 2 to 3 years of being in Vera Happard after meeting Jade, was sort of putting forward lots of ideas, getting little bits of traction, but not enough and not quick enough to see the scale of change that we felt was necessary to deliver on the United Nations SDGs. And so it was really about pace of change that pushed us to take a different route. And this was also at the time that, we were seeing Elon Musk go a bit crazy with all his starting SpaceX, really radical change within the car and automotive industry with Tesla. And there is this idea that sometimes to make change in an industry that is very entrenched in its current ways and it can be a little bit traditional, actually you sometimes have to step out and take a sort of outward approach. And I think for us, we knew enough about the industry's pains and about the sort of the politics and the context and the emotional attachment to the ways of working for us to build something that would really work for the industry. But we were still young enough and naive enough to think that we could change it. And I think there's sort of that happy balance of knowing enough to do something, but not knowing too much that you're sort of, disenfranchised with it all. In terms of whether it was scary, absolutely terrifying. I spend most of my days going, God, what am I doing? This is mad. How am I responsible for 21 people's salaries and all of that? But I think again it comes back to that sort of perfect combination of naivety and enthusiasm to not feel so scared that you don't do it, but also that realism and that grit and determination to really want to see something change and to be really wedded to that idea that change is possible and change is necessary, that kind of pushes you through that sort of barrier of fear and uncertainty.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I've heard the phrase that's dubbed corporate immune system, which is that, when you're trying to start something new and not by any fault of its own, but it's got procedures and systems in place to, not intentionally hold you back, but when you're trying to move at that speed, that's really important to sort of be able to not have those in place. But yeah, that's a really amazing kind of story that you've got behind you, even if it is scary. I think you're doing an amazing job. So as you were sort of building this business in QFlow, how were you going about developing the idea for it? Was it through sort of client engagement? And you sort of said, obviously, you've had sort of mini incubator type roles, but what were the kind of things that you did to develop it to where it is now?
Yeah, I think the first thing we did with Jade and I is we just sort of sat down and said, what isn't working? And why do we think that maybe is? And we started to try and build a bit of a hypothesis. So the first version of QFlow is quite different to where we are now. Not, the mission's the same and the overall impact is very much the same in terms of using data to drive more sustainable construction. But what the product looked like is completely different. And I think it was that we had this sort of this clear thesis or hypothesis that, the industry wants to change, but as you said, there's that immune system, that's momentum that kind of makes change really hard. And so there's got to be a clear, particularly for engineers, quantified, numbers-based rationale for that change and a clear roadmap to do it. And we kind of started to unpick that, data was a really clear key part of that. But getting hold of that data was taking up so much of people's time and energy and emotional resilience that actually using the data wasn't happening. And so we sort of started with a hypothesis, and then with Entrepreneur First, we had the space and the time to really test that hypothesis. So I think we really would have struggled to do it if we were still in full-time employment. And I think, having those 3 months with EF to actually really focus on addressing this problem and talking to the industry. And I also think that time of talking to, we spoke to over 100 different engineers, just saying, right, tell me what doesn't work for you. We're going in with a really broad remit. What doesn't work for making your industry more sustainable? And then sort of following those questions down. There's a great book called The Mum Test, MOM, which kind of unpicks some of these things and helps like pull out the key questions that will help you find that. So I think really it started with a hypothesis that we then tested in sort of questions, but then we built what's called an MPV, so the minimum viable product that could be deployed in a construction environment and stress tested with the industry to say, okay, here's our thesis, here's how we're going to test it. Now let's see what actually happens. Is that valuable enough for someone to want to buy and for us to turn into a, profit with a purpose company? And that's really how it sort of evolved. And once we'd addressed the timber issue, they're like, can you do this for waste as well? And we're like, sure, probably. And again, we built the new MVP for waste. And then we started capturing all materials. So, concrete, steel, all the way down to like nuts and bolts. And fascinatingly, PPE was being captured in the product. And so, during the first lockdown, we saw this huge spike in, the volume of PPE that was coming onto projects. And yeah, just really sort of building it out piece by piece, not trying to eat the whole elephant at once, just going for the chunks at a time.
Yeah, that's great. I've heard about the mum test a few times. It's a very good one.
No.
I would recommend anyone who's listening to have a look into that. So what would you say is the biggest challenge that you faced, and how did you go about overcoming that?
Yeah, we get asked this question a lot, and the reality is that the biggest challenge changes every day. And what was the biggest challenge for us, 6 months, 8 months ago is now, completely not even in my head. And so I think it's hard to say what has been the biggest challenge overall. I think we've had some really clear, obvious ones. So around raising investment, we've confronted quite a lot of problematic attitudes around construction and female founders, and because we're 2 female founders, which is like doubly difficult for investors to get their head around. So I think there's been emotionally challenging aspects around that, because you just have to keep moving forward in spite of like the perceived injustice. And sometimes there isn't even injustice there, but you get it stuck in your head sometimes, and it's really difficult. And I think it's just that level of grit and determination is really important for getting over every challenge. I think the other thing that has been incredibly helpful with overcoming each of the challenges we face is drawing on other support, being completely comfortable with saying, I have no idea how to handle this. I have never seen this before. This is totally insane. And ultimately, there's always someone who's seen it before. You've just got to find that person and ask them. And so we've, gently built up this incredible network of other founders who are more experienced, of investors, of industry people who just want to help, and we just go to them and be like, okay, I am lost here, like how do I do this? And quite often they'll just sit down and go, oh yeah, no worries, that's really easy, we've seen that before, this is how you address that. And you're like, oh right, it's that simple. So I think, yeah, with challenges, it's always about finding the right people to help you, who have seen it before and can help you get over that.
Great advice. I mean, I guess what would be your key piece of advice to anyone thinking about starting their own business?
I think the thing that gets in most people's way is the fear of it flopping, the fear of failure. And I know particularly in our industry, we're so risk averse, and failure is not an option when you're designing a bridge. And so that gets ingrained in our very beings and the way we think about everything. And actually, to drive change, sometimes you have to be comfortable with that failure. And I know it's something that's talked about a lot, but actually going on that journey personally and you know, getting really comfortable with failure is still really confronting. And I think, you know, when I told my parents that I was going to leave my lovely job in Bath that was well paid and, you know, was paying my mortgage and all that, and go and do something that, you know, quite possibly wouldn't go anywhere after 3 to 6 months and could end up with, you know, all kinds of like carnage, and like getting comfortable with saying that to them. And obviously I was incredibly lucky that my parents were very supportive and were like, yeah, great, cool, crack on. Like didn't put up any barriers, and like friends have always you know, appropriately bantered me for the madness. But I think, yeah, not being afraid of failure and giving yourself that space to learn, and not putting any expectations on yourself to know everything, because the reality is you can do anything, you can't do everything. So give yourself the space and the time to, you know, to not know what you're doing, to ask for help, but also to not try and push yourself so hard that you burn out, because we've done that a lot and it's painful. And we're still working out the best ways not to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great piece of advice. And I think that's a great place to kind of end this very inspiring little webcast. So Brittany, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us. I really think your journey around how you've developed this business and the sort of lessons that you've just imparted about, you know, not being afraid to fail and, you know, having the grit and determination and really kind of just believing in what you do is really inspiring. And you keep going, I think. Even if you haven't quite worked out the right recipe, I think keep going on the trajectory you're going. It's great to see.
Amazing. Thanks, Emily. I really appreciate it.
Right. And so to the audience, many thanks for listening. I hope you found this conversation interesting. As usual, we have a question for you off the back of what you've just heard, which is, do you think there should be more entrepreneurial training in the industry? And if so, what elements of entrepreneurship do you wish you could learn more about? Please let us know about your thoughts in the comments, and we will be getting back in touch with all of you to try and respond to what you've asked. You've been listening to the ACE Emerging Professionals webcast. To find out more about the webcast, upcoming episodes and events, please visit our website or our LinkedIn page.